So just to let everyone know, we're going to be recording this talk. Your video, your cameras and your microphones are turned off, so hopefully it won't affect you too much, but it does mean that the questions you ask in the chat messages may appear, but just so you know. And hopefully you can see, no, have I done that? Yes. Hopefully you can see Devizes Assize Court on the screen, with our with the museum's patron, Phil Harding, on the screen. Hopefully that's all right. Yep. Okay. Thanks, Karen, for the confirmation. So we've got 80 odd people on the call. So a very warm welcome to everyone. Just before I kick off properly, just to say that if your video and your camera and your microphones are turned off, would love you to ask some questions, but if you do that by going to the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a Q&A button and you can type in your question, and you can start doing that while I'm talking, but we'll come and try and answer those at the end. And I'm joined this evening by Colin Johns, who is the consultant architect for the Historic Buildings Trust. So the work on the Assize Court is a real labour of love for many of us. And it is now two organisations, particularly, that are working together, very much together. So there's the Devizes Assize Court Trust, and then there's the Wiltshire Museum. So the Assize Court Trust is a charity. It was set up in order to own the building and to ensure that the future of the building could be ensured, and so really to make it available for the members of the public. So the Assize Court is now owned by the Assize Court Trust. It was purchased from the former owner, who had it for many years and, to put it tactfully, not done a lot with it. And the Assize Court Trust have appointed architects who have been working to develop plans for the building. The other partner is the Wiltshire Museum. I am the director. Oh, sorry, just to clarify, so Colin is the consultant architect and the chair is Peter Troughton. So I'm David, I'm the director of the museum, and our chair is Martin Nye. And Martin is a member of is one of the trustees of the Assize Court Trust, just to show that everything is, we're working very closely together. And the intention is that the museum will occupy and run the building once everything is complete, which may take a while, and the museum will be the lead on applying for grants for a number of reasons, not least of which was we've only been around since 1853, so we have a little bit of a track record. So for those of you that don't know the museum, and maybe some, just to highlight that we have nationally important collections, particularly gold from the time of Stonehenge. We've got award-winning displays. The word cloud you see there is what our visitors say about their visit to the museum. And we work with English Heritage and the Stonehenge Visitor Centre, which means that we help encourage tourists to come and visit the museum, come and visit Devizes, and they spend their money elsewhere in Wiltshire. So just turning to now onto the Assize Court proper. The story of the building is, to put it mildly, quite a long one. It was built in 1835 and was designed by Thomas Wyatt. It was built as an Assize Court, and just to clarify, an Assize Court is where a judge, essentially from London, comes and hears important cases. They would come 4 times a year, something like that, and hear those important cases, and then move on to another location. The building was in use as a court until, I think, 1983, and then it was sold by Wiltshire Council. And here are some photos of the inside of it as it is now. It's been through a few owners, and basically it has been stripped and unfortunately not loved. And the Assize Court Trust have appointed architects, Purcell, who have developed some plans for the building. Now, what you see on the screen now is their very first bash at what that might look like. And now I'm going to try to be very fancy and show you a video of how this looks. This is option A, just to give you an idea. And I think the latest is option G, which shows you how far things have moved. So I'm going to stop sharing for the moment and then change to and just show you a little video, if all goes well. There we go. So hopefully you can see the video. So this is, and I'll set it running in a moment. So this is a fly-through of how the building might look. But there are this, as I say, this is option A. And so, for example, we have a cafe out the front. Now, Purcell, the architects weren't sort of very familiar with the building. They had visited it, but didn't know it as well as we do. So perhaps those of you who know Northgate Street will know that having a cafe at the front of the building is perhaps not a great idea, nor is putting two trees there. But I think it will give you an idea of how the building might work. So the intention is very much to restore the front part of the building, the historic core, and to restore it to something like its former glory. Though unfortunately, all the interior fittings have gone. And then to add an extension out the back, because to make it into a museum, we need more space than it has currently. This view particularly highlights the view from the canal. And then when you start to peer inside the building, again, remember this is option A, not where we are, but it does give an idea of how the building might work. And particularly the former Assize Court, the one on the right-hand side, that would be a lecture room and also be cleared away to be an event space. But I think that's quite helpful to give you a rough idea of how the building might work. So I'm going to stop sharing that now and go back to my PowerPoint presentation. Which hopefully you can see, no, I'm not sure I've got the right one. There we are. Should be right. So that was option A. Where we are now is at option, we're probably at option H, but this is option G, which this is a view of the ground floor of the building. And the different colors are there to show the different ways in which the spaces would be used. And this is broadly the plan that we consulted on. For those of you that remember, in September at Heritage Open Days, we had an exhibition out at the back of the Assize Court. So the idea is that you would go in through the portico. This would be the welcome space with a ticket desk and shop. Has to be a shop, it's a museum, it's compulsory. And then there would be displays in this the blue area along the bottom. So this was the former magistrates court. This would be new build. This was what many people remember as being the police station. Then on the other side, the pink bit would be the learning center. So this would be used for school groups, for workshops, universities, whatever. And the space behind it, this is the original Assize Court. This would be our multi-use space. So in an ideal world, we would have rake seating, so it would make a fantastic lecture theatre, perhaps show films even, but then could be cleared away and tables put in. Perhaps we could have dinner at the museum, perhaps weddings, all sorts of things like that. So very much a space that can be used in many different ways. And then you would go through, and the sort of pale yellow area, this would be cafe looking out over the canal, which of course means we can make a great feature of that. And then with service entrance around the side. Then the basement, the original cells are still there, so that would become part of the interpretation. The architects have suggested having a brand new stair linking the education space on the ground floor with the cells. So this could be used in a self-contained way for school groups. So they'll be able to find out about Victorian justice, well away from other visitors. And hopefully we would have some storage space on the in a basement. And then looking at the first floor, rather confusingly, the ramped access is shown linking to the first floor, which doesn't quite make sense, but never mind. The main spaces of the historic building, so that's the former police station area, the main entrance, the atrium, the learning centre, which was the grand jury room, and the main assize court, would all be open to their full existing height, their historic height. So the assize court is huge. It's almost triple height, to be honest. Then the magistrates court, we would put a new floor in, and that would become offices, staff room, meeting spaces. Number 6 would be a multi-use meeting space, particularly for community groups. The blue would be a special exhibition gallery. That would be for our key exhibitions, like the Revilius one, for example, we've got coming up in September. There would be, then this would be our library and archive with study space looking out over the canal. And then in some way, this roof would be at above the ground floor, and the suggestion is of a green roof to link the parts of the building. So this, bearing in mind, this is sort of an outline plan. This, the way the roof spaces work in detail has yet to be specified. We have then, since September, we've done a lot more work, particularly with a company called Image Makers. And they have done 2 very much interrelated pieces of work for us. The first is to think about how we would use the display space, how the displays might work, how we'll approach the interpretation and telling the story of Wiltshire and of Devizes and of the Assize Court. And these are some bits of their initial plan. So we're blocking out how the building is going to be used, and then working out what the essentially the flow through the displays might be. Now, interestingly, they're suggesting coming in at the back of the main entrance hall, the atrium space, and then going in, doing a circuit around the building, going through the archaeology and history of the county in order, like so. What they've also done is produce some visuals showing ways in which the interpretation might look. At the moment, this is very much initial ideas. The chances are, it's not going to, the one thing I can guarantee is it will not look like the drawings I'm about to show you, but it gives you an idea of the look and the feel that we would be aiming for. There's a lot of work to do before we get to that stage. One of the other things they did was just to tease us with ideas and make us think about how the external spaces, the outdoor spaces of the building might be used. And here are some examples of ways of other places that show how you can use the outdoor space in really imaginative ways. And that links with a challenge I was given by someone who said that they wanted that the challenge was that people would want to use the level access routes into the building, essentially the ramps, rather than going straight up the steps. So that we should do something that was really attractive and really engaging people with the different ways of approaching the entrance. And this is an initial idea for the atrium space. So you see here the ticket desk and the main entrance to the displays would be through there. But the whole, you see the lights streaming in through the roof lights and bringing it to life with an artistic piece, something really sculptural. And this is a suggestion of something inspired by white horses suspended from the ceiling. So as you enter the building, your first reaction is, wow, this is an absolutely amazing space. And so the idea is to enhance that, but also bring something of Wiltshire and Wiltshire story into that main entrance. And then as you go through the displays, we'll be telling the story of the archaeology of the county. So this is the very earliest part of prehistory, time of hunter-gatherers, and then we follow through to what really is the core, many ways the most important part of the collections, those from that relate to the Bronze Age, particularly for um, the burial, the objects buried with people who were around at the time of Stonehenge, what we call gold from the time of Stonehenge. And the designers have suggested using display cases, upright display cases, that mirror the architecture of Stonehenge. And following through into the other galleries, their suggestion for the Saxon gallery, which I think is really interesting, is to use part of the timber framework of a Saxon hall and to use that as the framework for hanging the displays on, if you like. As I say, these ideas are a sort of broad brush approach just to show how it might work. And then we need to make a link between, if you like, the archaeological story up to, let's say, 1066, and then to switch that into the story of Devizes, which would be a particular focus. And the idea then is to have some space that marks that transition. And again, some images of other displays that show sort of ways of making us think about how we might tell the story of the town of Devizes. And as we talked to them, we were all struck by the idea of using maps or aerial photographs on the floor. I've seen that used in very effectively in other places and really bring that story to life. And this visual gives you an idea of how that might work, with a framework highlighting some of the key objects that tell that story, and also allowing you to relate where you are to in the town, to tell the story of the town and create those links to encourage people to go and visit the town and explore and spend money, of course, in the pub, shops and restaurants that we've got. And then there are a couple of spaces off that main what was the former police station, and we might then bring through the story of some of the characters involved in that were so important in the story of Devizes. Someone like Ruth Pierce, for example, or Empress Matilda, or highlight some key objects, particularly those that are not actually from Devizes itself that we have in the collections, like the Laycock Cup. And then we want to tell the story of justice and what the Assize Court was used for, of justice and also injustice. And there are some wonderful stories of trials that were held and what happened to people once they were sentenced. We know that people were sentenced and sent to Australia and also executed. Others got off scot-free. So a huge number of stories to tell. And we would do that in the cells in the basement. And a key thing for us is to make sure that everything is, all the spaces are accessible. There would be a lift which would go down to the basement level. So everyone, even those who are not so good on their pins and can get down, who are not, who have difficulty with stairs, they would be able to go down into the cellars and explore the cells. Anything about locking the kids away if they make too much noise, can't be doing that, of course. So I hope that gives a bit of an insight into the way that we would be intending to use the building for interpretation and sort of telling the story of Wiltshire and of Devizes. The second piece of work they did was on looking at the people who might visit the museum and might engage with it and how we plug in to the local community. They produced an audience development report, which is a mere 53 pages with a mere 61 pages of appendices, so a nice quick read. And this was the result of a whole bunch of consultation events and so on that we did during lockdown, inevitably in the late autumn. So we ran the very grandly called World Cafe, which is sort of flip chart and flip chart heaven, but we couldn't do that because, of course, we couldn't meet to play with the flip charts, but it's that same principle. we ran a series of focus groups. And you see here a virtual consultation with a focus group um, working with Alzheimer's support. We did online surveys, a survey of teachers, and altogether we had 328 people responded to various bits of this consultation. And there's a whole bunch of statistics that come out of this. And just to give you an idea of the detail in here, this is this chart sort of based on postcode. It assigns all of us into a number of general categories. You know, this is the sort of thing that market researchers just love. And the colours here, let's just check, the sort of purple is people who live in Devizes. This is the demographics of those of us in Devizes. The green is the demographics of people in Wiltshire as a whole, and blue are the people who currently visit the museum, as best we can tell. Over 250 people fill in a survey form for us each year, and this gives us this data. And what this tells us is something about the people who come to the museum. So if you see, for example, Commuterland Culture Buffs, that's one of these titles that you don't need explaining. You know, we get lots of them. Metro Culturals, even worse. Look how many we get of them. And in inverted commas, there's none in Devizes. And what that tells you is the people who visit, but most importantly, those who don't visit the museum at the moment. And a number of them, for example, Facebook families. So this is young families who may be struggling, or lots of competing priorities. Do you visit a museum, or do you take your son and your daughter to go and play football or go swimming? It's those sort of choices that we're all making, of course. And so we're not, and what we want to be able to do in the future is to make it easier and to attract more of those people to visit the museum. And by looking at those surveys, they were able to tell us that 20,000 odd use the museum one way or another. People who visit really enjoy the museum. And the chart down at the bottom, this word cloud, is the words. We asked people to give 3 words to talk about their visit, to say what their visit was like for them. And you get, look at that: interesting, fun, friendly, educational, enjoyable, informative. It's brilliant. And people really do appreciate their visit. And what's quite good for us is, considering the staffing levels and space, we do what we can. I don't want to belabor this point, but some of you will know the sort of financial situation of the museum. We get a grand total of £12,500 in grant from Wiltshire Council and £4,000 from Devizes Town Council. It costs £350,000 to run the museum. And everyone would like museums to be free, but what you may not know is that we all pay, the average per head, we all pay £1 a year to keep the British Museum running. And as a Wiltshire council taxpayer, we each pay less than half a penny to keep our museum running. That's the sort of difference, which is why we do what we can, but we are rather stretched, I think is not a bad word. And again, they say community level museum is seen as a vital resource, providing sense of pride, civic identity, tourism, and economic benefits. We know, you can do some sums. We are worth something like £750,000 a year to the local economy. That's the money that people spend when they come and visit the museum. They go and visit cafes, restaurants, pubs, they stay overnight. That's their spend each year. So we know quite a lot about the people who do visit us. What we know less about is the people who don't. And we were able to, because there's so many people want to see something happen to the Assize Court, we had a lot of people who really want to see something happen with the Assize Court, but have never visited the museum. And these are the reasons they give. We sort of this is a sort of these options are given to them and give tick boxes. So they're not sure what's there and whether it's for them. Lack of time, no particular reason, new to the area, limited parking, not sure where it is. All of those things basically are, it's there. Why do I go today? Why, I've got something else to do. It's why visit? Why come today? And the ones that are really disappointing are the ones that it's mainly for experts, archaeology, history enthusiasts. And when you saw the chart, the word cloud of how people react once they have visited. So that's why people say they don't come. And then we ask them, what would make them come? What would make them come to visit the museum? And this is what they say: to find out about Wiltshire's past, Wiltshire's heritage, see a special exhibition, find out about Devizes and its local history, see the amazing archaeology collections. We're there at still above 38%. Take part in a workshop, tour, or talk. Something to do with the kids, fun, entertaining experience. I think it's probably fair to say we do all those. Apart from other, please specify. One way or another, we do all those. I think the real problem one of the real problems that sort of spins from all this is that people in the town don't know enough about what we offer. We're always there. They've passed us. Perhaps they visited 20 years ago when they're at school. Why come back? Why get engaged? What's different? And the consultants, image makers, very much said, and this, I couldn't have written this better myself. Main factors limiting engagement is the location of the built museum and the building itself. So the current museum is away from the marketplace, the other side of the St. John's Church, residential street. You've really got to want to go there. It's off the beaten track. And people also think that the museum is only the small bit of stone building that you see. That's just one of the 5 buildings that have been knocked together to make the museum. So from the outside, you just don't appreciate the scale. The fact that we've got 13 galleries and we're larger than most museums. They have no idea of the scale and the scope and the quality of the collections. And then it's given that we are not public, that we are an independent charity and not particularly well funded, to put it mildly. We do what we can to run activities, reach new audiences, and diversify the visitor base, but the issue is not one of staff capability or enthusiasm, but sheer capacity. We've got to make the place work. We've got to pay the rent, if you like. So doing all these extra things, it can be quite tough on top of just what we already do. The team also asked what people valued about the museum, why it's important to Devizes, and this is what they said. So tourism, family resource, sense of place, civic identity, community role, tells stories, source of local pride. We have world-class collections and we enable world-class research. So at the moment, we're lending objects to 2 touring exhibitions, one of them in the United States. It's on a 3-year tour of the US and is then going to Australia and New Zealand. We're lending to an exhibition that opened last week in Germany, and in September, we're lending yet more items to a second exhibition that opens in Germany. And then next year, we're lending a whole bunch of objects to a major exhibition about prehistoric Europe that's going to be at the British Museum. That's the quality of our collections, but most people in the town don't realize that. But there we are, that's life. The team then also looked at the demographics of Devizes as a town. And this looks at, sort of compares the what they call deprivation of different parts of the town. So deep green is the least deprived parts of so the 10% least deprived areas. When it goes down to red, that's the 10% most deprived. And this is by local council ward, that's the area. And the town, the Assize Court is rather conveniently located in one of the 20% most deprived wards in Wiltshire. And so the museum can play an important role in working in the community. Um, Wiltshire, many people from outside think that Wiltshire is very wealthy. It's posh people who live here, but we know that in fact there's a whole range of people and rural problems, rural isolation in particular. And there's a lot we can do, particularly to work through with other organisations such as the Shore Start Children's Centre, which of course is on the green, so is slap bang across the other side of the town from the people who need to use it most. So we could be running activities in the new building, linking to the Shore Start Centre to help engage those families. One of the fun things we did at the World Cafe, again, horrible title, but it was a great event. 20 people, mainly sort of who work with different sort of charitable organisations. And we sort of ran through what the building was like at the moment and asked them whether they thought current building is fit for purpose. As you can see, basically the answer is no. The current building is rubbish. 5 buildings knocked together, 25 floor levels, no space for a cafe, no outside space, we can't advertise ourselves, we're too far from the town centre, all those things. And sorry, slightly wrong order. Some of the other, I know why, forget that one, I'll come back to that. We also did some work with teachers to ask them how they might use. We sort of went through what the aim of the project was, and we asked them how they might use the museum with their classes and in their teaching and learning. And the teachers said they're thinking mainly of they mainly use the museum for the history curriculum. And that's actually key stage 1 and 2. That's the age range most likely to visit museums in general. Particularly archaeology collections and local history. But the secondary schools don't use us at the moment, but realized as we started to talk to them that if we had a higher profile, if we had the new building, then there are all sorts of projects that we could be running. Geography, art and design, they run a session, there's a course on tourism, all sorts of things like that we could be doing, as well as the story of justice in the Victorian period and links to citizenship. So again, teachers think of us as being a fuddy-duddy, small little place full of cobwebs. They see the building, see what we could do in that building, and suddenly they get very excited. They then linked through and worked out some core audiences. Those are the audiences we currently work with quite reasonably. So archaeology and history specialists, we know we get those. We work with preschools, primary schools, day trippers, international tourists. But then they particularly looked at the audiences we haven't been able to reach and that we need to be working with in the future. So struggling local communities, young adults, secondary schools, domestic, overseas tourists on organized tours. Those are the audiences we need to be working with in the future. And these are the barriers that visitors face. And I won't go through those in detail, but you can see the level of detail that they've gone through in this. Things like joint ticketing, no cafe, staff capacity, low profile, no changing place toilet, cramped displays, no parking, uninviting entrance. The list goes on. Lack of cohesion. I told you the list went on. Limited offer for toddlers, misconceptions about the building, and so on. And from that, they were able to suggest key priorities and activities for working with groups in the future, and so that we can widen our audiences, diversify audiences, and deepen our engagement with those audiences. And they came up with, I think it's something like 14 pages like this of activities the target audiences that we would be working with, and then how that links to the outcomes that the National Lottery Heritage Fund are seeking to achieve, and that we would be wanting to achieve through the project. So I won't go through those in detail, things like teen tours, young adult digital projects, temporary exhibition program, working with people in the community, working with Sure Start, and so on and so forth. There's pages of great ideas that we can easily do. And then I said that we asked the people in that World Cafe if they thought the current Wiltshire Museum was fit for purpose. And that's what they said, basically, no. And then we talked to them about the proposals that you just heard about, and we asked them to write 3 words about what they thought about those proposals. And look, the key word, excited. And I very much hope that that's what you think as well. We would hope to be attracting something like 20,000 paying visitors, and something like 40,000 people to be using the building each year. If we were able to achieve 20,000 visitors, that would mean that we were worth well over £2 million to the local economy each year. Probably more when you include the other people using the building. £2 million plus per year for the local economy. Not bad in these rather difficult times for us all. Where we are now with the project, and I'll come on to that in a bit more detail, so to explore that in a bit more detail, is that the architects, that's Purcell, have developed plans to RIBA Stage 2. That sounds very technical. What it means is that's slightly more than the back of an envelope, but it's nothing like good enough to apply for planning permission. We know what the basic outline of the building should be. We know how we're going to use it, but we haven't yet designed where the power sockets would go, for example. There's a lot of work to go into that detail before the project would actually happen. But we got some rough costs. Well, actually slightly more than rough costs. We got some costs for how much the project will cost. And you see all the different things there. So that's looking after the restoring the historic building, doing the activity program to engage with our new audiences, the new build, exhibition fitting out, and so on. And total of something like £12.5 million. So the question is, where do we get it from? I think we've got about, 80 people on the call, so 12.5 million divided by 80. Check will do nicely, thank you. The obvious thing we're going to be doing is applying to the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Now, we have actually submitted, the process is quite complicated. There are basically 3 stages you go to. And rather confusingly, stage 2 is called stage 1, but let's pass right along from that. The first thing we do is submit an expression of interest. We have to encapsulate the whole project in 800 words. And that's not just what the project will do in terms of restoring the building, installing displays, that's also telling them the audiences we would be wanting to work with and how we're going to engage with those new audiences. 800 words. Now, we actually submitted one of those back in March. The National Lottery, the Heritage Fund, had been closed for applications during COVID, and they reopened in March. So we submitted an expression of interest. The first one has been declined, shall we say, but we're being encouraged to submit a second. Now, a number of things have happened, which means that that second one will be a lot stronger. And basically, the expression of interest, you have to tick sort of persuade them that you've ticked a number of boxes. And there are basically 3 boxes. We got a very strong tick on one, which is the heritage need, which is restoring a building that's on the heritage at risk register. Basically, if something isn't done with it, it isn't going to be around in 10 years' time. And secondly, the museum has nationally important collections, and they deserve a better home. We need to do more work, or we need to persuade them that we have understood that the audiences we want to work with and then we need to show them that the plans we have are linked into regeneration for the town and bringing bringing new life to the town. So I think we will be able to do that, and the intention is to submit a second expression of interest, probably in July. It's quite common, by the way, for projects to have to go through 3 or even 4 or even 5 different expressions of interest, and you have to wait 3 months between each one. Once we get through that, we're allowed to put in a proper application, a stage 1 bid. No longer is it 800 words, now it's going to be about 200 pages. And we've got a lot of that basic material is now in place through the work I've been talking about. If we're able, we would submit that in early 22. We get a result a few months later. If we're fortunate and pass first time, again, many projects have to go through 2, 3, or even 4 goes at that. When we succeed in that, we then are invited to bid for stage 2. In that stage 1, what's called the development phase, the idea is you work up your plans in much more detail, particularly for example, the architectural plans, more or less to the point where you can submit a planning application, and then also work up in more detail the plans of how you will engage with different audiences. The idea is then that if you're successful in the stage 2 bid, that's when you get the money to actually do the project. And then construction might start, if it all went well, in summer 2025, and potentially we might be able to open the building in 2027 or 2028. But the whole thing is dependent on how long it takes to go through these stages. The Heritage Fund, the maximum they will give us is 5 million. And it doesn't require a genius to realize that that leaves a gap of 7.5 million. Now we're working with some fundraisers, and I think we can probably guess where we can get, let's say 4 or 5 million from, but then that leaves mainly from trusts and foundations, but that still leaves 2 to 3, probably more by the time we've got inflation in place. We've got to try and find the rest. So that's going to be a real challenge over the next few years. Right, that's everything I wanted to say. I'm very happy now to try and attempt to answer any questions. And Colin, hopefully you're still there, and if you could turn your camera on, and we'll see where we are with questions. I've just got to sort out my screens for a moment, and then I'll be with you. So I'm juggling
right, back with you, David.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to take these from the top. Oh, Chris Callow has asked, will we be getting a copy of any slides for tonight's presentation? The presentation is being recorded, and I'll put that up on YouTube. So rather than the slides, I'm afraid you'll get me talking. Hard luck. Right, Peter, okay.
Yes, and we've got John Gervin asking us if we have any artifacts from a court.
From the original court. We've got some bits of stone that fell off the pediment at the top.
Well, we've got probably the most obvious ones are the clocks, which are in the record centre at the moment. But all of the court fittings, with the exception of just a few of the bits and pieces of the judge's dais, which you saw from the slides, have all disappeared. But one thing that has come out of the investigation, probably just to say to you that Purcell Architects were selected on a tender basis, but in order to win the contract, they were required to give us evidence of previous projects. And there is a very impressive list. But we're also looking to see to what extent the court may be recreated in a digital form, similar to some of the work they've recently done at Bristol Aerospace. So although we don't necessarily have artifacts, I think we will be able to present to some extent, what life as a prisoner or as a juror or as indeed counsel or member of the public was like.
Okay. So yeah, so basically, to answer your question, John, there's not a lot left, unless anyone on the call knows of any. I'd be delighted to hear. And one of the town councillors, Councillor Greenwood, dropped in a small archive, which was very interesting the other day. That's sort of from the 1980s onwards. So if anyone got stuff, that would be interesting to hear about. Sue has said, where is the catering kitchen going? Near the cafe area? The answer to that is yes. Precise details. Again, that's the issue of a broad brush approach for the architecture at the moment. The further we go along, the more detailed it gets, and the more we will be specifying the kitchen area. So absolutely, that needs to be slap bang right next to the cafe. Sue was also suggesting a specialist interpretation company, not the main or secondary architects. Couldn't agree more. And that's exactly what we've done. We went out to tender for the company that called Image Makers, who did both the interpretation strategy and the audience development work. But those were two separate contracts, but it was the same company who won both. And it's great to see the interrelation between the two, because of course they are related. Stephen has said, how big is the shop reception area? It's a bit difficult to read the scale on your screen. Well, it's a bit difficult to read the scale anyway. One day...
That is that in floor space dimensions, the main hall is about 8 meters by 10, but it's also 8 meters high. So it's just a bit more than a cube. And for anybody who perhaps remembers it, we had a note on the chat, I think. Peter said he worked at the police station in 1957. Anybody who's been in will appreciate that it is actually an extremely generous volume. It may look small, but it feels big.
The way I can sort of relate to it is the size of the current lecture room, and it's more than the size of the current lecture room square, if you see what I mean. It's big. Right, Elizabeth has said, very exciting, lots of great ideas. How does the volume of exhibition space compare with what you've got now? And that's something I think Tessa was asking. There seems to be an awful lot of space not given to exhibition. So the exhibition space is about 20% more than we have at the moment. But at the moment, we lose a lot of space in the twists and turns of those small domestic spaces. And we don't necessarily need a huge amount of extra display space. What we need is display space that works more effectively and efficiently. And so we had a very detailed brief, which you can actually see on the Devizes Assize Court Trust website, which laid out the current space in the museum and what we wanted. So lots of measuring and tape measures and things like that. And Purcell have given us more than the display space that we'd asked for. So it will be bigger, but not double the size. And of course, the issue there is that some of our visitors, the average dwell time is between 1.5 and 2 hours. And most people don't get all the way around because they're so desperate for a cup of tea. So when we've got the cafe, then that will mean that people will be able to spend longer in the displays. So it's a bit of a balance, because if we were to double the display space, that doesn't mean people would stay longer. So it's a balance. Paul has said storage space for collections of the future. Yeah, now that's a tricky one. We would need some storage in the new building, but at the same time, town centre space, ground floor, because the archaeology collections, which will be the largest growth, of course, that's little more than glorified hardcore, he says, pot, bone and stone, that needs to be stored on the ground floor. And ground floor space in the town centre site is very valuable. So we would like to have used to have basement storage, but I think what we'll need to do is find the storage space elsewhere where the land is less valuable. and there's a number of irons in the fire on that. But again, we did specify what we need, so we know what we need to do. Tony and Zita have said, wouldn't the cafe be more attractive if upstairs with a better view of the canal? Possibly, but how many times do you go upstairs to a cafe? We know from other museums that cafe needs to be on the ground floor. And what you then would have is space to sit out at the back. We can have some play space for the kids, but also enclosed so that they won't wander and throw themselves in the canal. It will work much better on the ground floor. The other thing is that then the kitchen will we'll be able to link through from the kitchen through to the multi-use space, what is the current assize court, so that you'll be able to use the catering kitchen for events in the assize court. So what I've realized is something I've not mentioned is that the story of the assize court will be told in the assize court itself. The suggestion is, rather than sort of cases and large numbers of graphic panels, that will be done through AV and projections, so that when the space is not being used for events, we can tell the story of what happened in the assize court. But then at other times, we might be able to use something like the balcony spaces, and to be able to tell the story in other ways, because we do need to make sure that we're telling the story of what happened in the assize court when it was the assize court. Tony and Zita have said, are you incorporating solar hot water and electric focus on green? Colin, I think that's one for you.
Yes, well, I think the answer is we will indeed. One of the things that is very important today, not just for this project, but for many others, is sustainability. And the question of how we best heat the building and ventilate the building will be for some further investigation, because it's very easy to say, oh, let's put some solar panels up, but we've got consulting engineers looking at all the options, so that, including, in fact, there was even thoughts about using ground source heat pump or water from the canal, but we've got various ideas, and they, at a later stage, will be investigated so we can do the best we possibly can. And I think also tied in with that, David, is the question, which is, are we using existing car parks? Obviously, the car park linked to the wharf depends on securing a canal side walk right through, which is all part of the bigger Devizes wharf regeneration picture and linked with what happens to the future of Wadworth. Again, these are all being pursued very actively at the moment. And one of the things that is also linked with sustainability is not to try and encourage everybody to drive to the museum, but to use other forms of access, which hopefully will also add to the attraction. Just to go back to the cafe, David, I think the interesting thing there is that if you look at the number of people who walk the canal, and indeed who may in future be walking on this side of the canal, people are immediately attracted to a cafe.
Absolutely. Can I pick up on a couple of things that you said, Colin? The first is on public transport. Many of you, those of you in Devizes, will have seen the idea of the Devizes Gateway Station. So the idea of that is that there will be a station with an hourly service just outside the town. And so people will be encouraged to use that, the train, to get to Devizes. The World Heritage Site, there's a report looked at the tourism potential, and there's a particular problem, is that people visit Stonehenge and Avebury and in their cars, and the intention there is to get people out of their cars and to improve the public transport links across the two parts of the World Heritage Site. And we, of course, slap bang in the middle, are perfectly positioned to encourage tourists to stop off en route, stay in hotels in the town, spend their money in cafes and restaurants and pubs. And on the green side, that's something that's very important for the Heritage Fund, for example. And the thing I'm always struck by is that we use electricity in the museum to light the display cases, and of course people are in the building most of the time when it's light outside. So I'm sure we will want to use whatever energy efficient and sort of green sources of power that there are that we can find. And the first time we met, Colin, actually, you told me about the idea of using a heat exchange from the canal as a possible source of heat. And as we have to replace all the floors, we could potentially have underfloor heating, which worked very well with ground source heat pumps. Tony and Zita encouraging us to continue with Zoom meetings, which we will. Thank you. Vote of confidence there. Philippa said, why not have an amnesty to try and get some of the artifacts back?
Well, it'd be very interesting to find out where those pieces are. I mean, they were stripped probably 25 years ago.
I did know where a table was, but it was ginormous and we'd have nowhere to keep it in the meantime. So yes, it would be, but at the same time, so much has gone, the paneling is gone, we can't recreate the courts as they were. That is just not realistic. But I'd love to know where the Royal Arms got to, and whether we can and if we can't find them, maybe we can recreate them in some way. Maybe and we will put a call out for things connected with the Assize Court for sure.
I think, David, it's also worth mentioning that we've struggled to find any photographs of the interior as it was before work started anywhere. Surprisingly, there seem to be, well, perhaps it's also relevant that it's court, and taking photographs in court is not usually permitted, but we don't even have any photographs that show the building completely intact interior. So that's really one that we need to search for, or if anybody can provide anything for us, it would be very welcome.
Yes, okay. And Peter has said thinks that the woodwork from the courts in Salisbury Guildhall has been kept in store. Well, possibly, but that's not the Devizes one. And we have had to put a call out in the council for particularly the coat of the Royal Arms, but without result. And Anne says, would parking be in existing town car parks? And the answer to that is yes. Something that's quite interesting is we did a survey of, we asked where our current visitors parked. And the average walk time from the car parks where they're actually parked to the museum, the average walk time was 7 minutes. The average walk time for those same car parks to the Assize Court was just 6 minutes. So that's without any change in behavior. The Assize Court was more convenient, if you like, for our visitors than the current building. Because of course we've got Station Road just down the hill, and the Wharf Car Park at the back, just along the back, and with a canal side path, which is what everyone wants to see achieved. That makes that linkage much easier.
I think also, David, worth adding to that it comes up in the question also, is that the location for the cafe is such that anybody can actually use that without having to go into the main museum. So it has a function way beyond just serving the museum, and hopefully for those walking the canal, it will be both of interest and in some cases entice them into the building.
Absolutely. Well, we very much want the building to be a place where people can go, feel comfortable, they'll be welcomed, and to enjoy the building, because anyone, that central spine running through from when you go through the big doors under the portico, go through to the welcome desk, and then walk through into the cafe, that access will be free access. Anybody can go through there. That's really important, so that people in the town feel that the building is one that they're always welcome in. Question about fundraisers. We have engaged, or the Assize Court Trust has engaged a professional fundraiser Absolutely. And it's fundraising is, well, it's obviously really difficult, but one of the key things, the key lessons from other projects is that there are two. The first is there's no point approaching other fundraisers until the Heritage Fund are fully on board, because other funders look to the Heritage Fund to sort of show that the project is one that will happen and one that is worth supporting. So that's why the focus is very much on the Heritage Fund at the moment. And the other thing is that you haven't yet received a missive saying, please give us money for the Assize Court, is that as well, is that if you start asking people for funds too early and they give you 50p, they might think they've done their bit. And particularly if they've got rather large wallets, 50p now, not really worth it. 50,000, 500,000 in 5 years' time, when the whole thing is on a roll, is quite a different matter. And the scale of the project means we need those sort of 50,000s from those people who can afford that. But it will be incredibly valuable to have the support of people in the town. So we will be doing things like sponsor a brick or a tile, or all the fundraising that you can imagine. But the advice is always, don't do anything until you're ready to go big. Colin has asked whether there's an estimate of the value of the current buildings. And I assume you mean the current museum buildings, and the answer is yes. However, I think it's fair to say that we need, my priority is to ensure that the museum is still there in 150 years' time. And so I don't want to be selling off the building for that money to disappear into a bottomless pit, and then to find out that in 10 years after we open the Assize Court, that we're in real financial trouble. So it's going to be, that's very much sort of the topmost of my mind, is ensuring that the museum can continue to survive and continue to thrive, actually, once we are at the Assize Court. I've done a projection which implies that we should be able to balance the books in the Assize Court with the numbers I talked about. But it's always going to be a risk until you actually see it happen. Sarah and Mike have said, will there be an entrance from the canal side to the cafe to bring in walkers, etc., who aren't necessarily visiting the museum? Would you do that one, Colin?
Yeah, I think we've covered that really, David. That was our earlier comment, that of course people will be very welcome to take that as a, well, hopefully possibly even a place to meet friends. It's
absolutely. Well, I'd be really disappointed if it wasn't.
Absolutely. I mean, one other thing I think is that museums nowadays are very different places to how they were several decades ago, and the whole aspect of a lot of the work here is to really provide a community facility for all kinds of activity. And if you look at some of the more recent museum projects that have been completed, that's exactly what they do. It expands the interest way beyond simply looking at artifacts. I think also, David, the other question that came up was about using buses and coaches. And of course, we will be providing specific space to drop off people very close to the building, so that that becomes an easy option. But perhaps a more difficult option is to use a canal boat at the wharf end, the canal wharf. I don't know how much, as it were, public activity takes place in Devizes, but my guess is not a great deal.
Yeah, well, I know Tony and Zita are, they're keen canal boaters. In fact, they're normally on a canal boat, so I'm not quite sure what they're doing in Sutton Hoo on land. They must have not used given up their webbed feet for a bit. But I really want to see the canal trip boat sort of dropping off at the back of picking up and dropping off at the back of the museum. It's an obvious thing to do, but that's not yet specified. Anne has said, what will happen to the current museum? I have no idea. The chances are that we would sell it off once the move was complete, but you know, it's very early. It's too early to know exactly what would happen and what uses may be made of the um, the building in the future. Anonymous question: is there a space for dedicated parking? There'll be blue badge parking. That's a must, but there won't be more general parking. Tony and Zeta bus stop as well as coach drop off at the front. Well, we will certainly be talking to Wiltshire Council about that as a possibility, especially if the Devizes Gateway station happens. We want there to be very easy access from the station to the museum to enable the sort of the linking between Stonehenge and Avebury to happen. It would be great if people started their visit to the World Heritage Site at the museum. Alison has said Amesbury History Centre currently being built in Amesbury. Will you be linking with them? A lot of the artifacts from the area are with you. Well, indeed they are. We have set up a website. We've led on setting up a website to promote all the museums in Wiltshire. So obviously we'll be doing that. But as the Archaeological Society of the county, with collections from across the whole of Wiltshire, particularly from the Stonehenge and Avebury landscape, you know, that's our USP. That's what we do. And Dave Weston, which is the last, and there's some others that. Oh, no, there's a couple of questions on the chat. Dave has said, do you think it's likely you might look for commercial sponsorship at some time in the future? I would hope that was an offer. If you've got any bright ideas, very happy to hear them. Yes, it'd be wonderful to have a Dyson gallery or something like that. And the answer is, yeah, we will. We would do anything for money, in a sense. We would certainly welcome commercial sponsorship because this is going to be a huge project. It's going to be challenging to fund it, and we'll need all the help we can get. Just to put that into perspective, the new Dorset Museum has opened in Dorchester. That's a £14 million project. The rules were different then. They got 11 million from the Heritage Fund, which shows you the difference. And there's a question on the chat from Tessa. Oh, which is about the increase in display space. So I think I've answered that. That was challenging. Are there any last questions? If not, happy for people to email into hello. Well, those of you who know my email address, I'm david.dawson@wiltshiremuseum.org.uk, or you can, from the website, you can find the email address to email things in. Be very happy to hear from you, particularly if you know the whereabouts of anything from the Assize Court. So I think that's everything I wanted to say. Very pleased I could try and answer your questions. A very big thank you to Colin for helping out. Colin, as the sort of consultant architect, has been working with the building for probably 30 years or so. And you know, it's wonderful to see it getting to the stage where something might eventually happen. So a big thank you to everyone. If anyone does have £12.5 million and would like to write us a check, I would be absolutely delighted. So thank you, everyone, and good night.
Yes, good night to you. Thank you.